Hello, and welcome to Sustainable Outlook, a podcast from global law firm K&L Gates, where we discuss the transactions, technologies, and trends in the sustainable economy. We hope you enjoy this discussion. Please reach out with suggested topics or guests, or questions about how we can work together to create a sustainable economy.
Welcome to this episode of Sustainable Outlook. I'm Molly Barker, your host for today's episode and an attorney in the Environmental and Energy Practice Group at K&L Gates. I'm very excited to be joined today by Dr. Erin Meyer, Director of Conservation Programs and Partnerships at the Seattle Aquarium. In her role, Erin oversees a diverse portfolio of research, field conservation, policy and advocacy, and species recovery programs in the U.S., Hawaii, and Coral Triangle. She also co-chairs the Aquarium's Regenerative Steering Committee and the Aquarium's Conservation Partnership. Erin has nearly 20 years of experience in conservation science, practice, and policy, and earned her PhD in marine conservation from the University of California, Berkeley, and holds a BS in biological oceanography and a BS in applied ecology, both from Rutgers University. Thanks so much for joining us, Erin.
Thanks for having me.
So let's just start with, I'd love to hear from you on what led you to get involved with the Seattle Aquarium.
Great question. So, the aquarium not only has a diversity of conservation expertise, but it also has this built-in platform to educate and engage with diverse audiences, not only on site, but also out along rivers and shorelines and virtually. We actually reach about 1 million people a year annually. And, in the conservation space, it's actually pretty rare for conservation organizations to have such a large platform. And, we really can't achieve the systemic change we're trying to achieve in conservation that we want to and need to achieve without inspiring millions of people to take action. And at previous organizations where I've worked, while there's been incredible expertise on the science or policy or education side, having all of those things under one roof, coupled with the platform we have, kind of makes the Seattle Aquarium a powerhouse for conservation. And 4.5 years ago, when I started in this position, is the first time this position existed at the aquarium. So also made it really exciting because it afforded me the opportunity to be really innovative and explore and expand and build new program areas like our policy and advocacy program and our species recovery program, and to set the aquarium's conservation priorities from the ground up. So when I reflect on the last 4.5 years, the truth is it's been a blast. There are challenges like with any job and certainly in conservation, but overall, I can't imagine working anywhere else.
Oh, that's awesome. I had no idea. I mean, that's so cool that you got to essentially kind of like take the reins yourself and run with it, which is, awesome, especially in such an exciting area. So with that, can you tell us a little bit about what you do in your role as Director of Conservation Programs and Partnerships then?
Absolutely. So I direct our research and field conservation, our policy and advocacy, and our species recovery work that we do at the aquarium. So the projects and initiatives that occur outside the walls and habitats at the aquarium, so out on the water, underwater, in our labs, and in both capitals, so in both Olympia and the other in Washington, D.C. And then we partner with over 100 organizations, tribes and First Nations, government agencies, academic institutions, and advance around 24 active projects right now, if I estimate. And then I also, as you mentioned at the top, co-chair our Regenerative Steering Committee together with our Director of Facilities. So that's our sustainable operations work that we do that we call regenerative work, which we can get into later. It's a lot. It's fun and very diverse.
Yeah, sounds like a lot of work and a lot of very exciting new work. And with you mentioning the regenerative plan, I understand that the regenerative plan includes the aquarium committing to having zero waste by 2025 and by 2030 becoming climate positive, reducing fresh and seawater consumption by 25% from 2018 levels, and having 80% of goods purchased by the aquarium meet its sustainable procurement policy. Can you talk a little bit about what the Seattle Aquarium has done so far to achieve these objectives and what obstacles, if any, remain in either meeting or maintaining these benchmarks?
Absolutely. So we actually started the process to create what we were then calling our Sustainable Master Plan back in 2019. For reasons that I think everybody listening can understand, we paused that process in March of 2020. We realized really early on that to do this work, to do just sustainability work, we needed to work across the organization. We wanted to make it a really inclusive process to develop the plan because we can't move forward with a plan that only part of the staff are bought into. So we paused for a little while, for about a year, picked it back up again in spring of last year in 21 and finished it just in the fall of last year. So the regenerative steering committee that I mentioned was one of the first things we did in implementing the regenerative plan, was really establishing this governance structure to make sure that there was a team whose job is to hold the aquarium accountable to achieving the objectives. So that steering committee has representatives that sit across the organization. And one of the first things we did was take a look at the regenerative plan, which includes over 100 strategies to achieve those different goals that you laid out there at the top. We worked through those to prioritize which ones we thought we could move forward this year, which ones we wanted to prioritize for next year, so that we could have a work plan to work through this year and next year. So that's been a big undertaking. Prioritizing the strategies was something we've been focused on for the last several months. The other two main things that we've been working on over the last, this year, one, we are right in the middle of recruiting for a regenerative program manager to help lead this work. So to bring some much needed capacity to ensure we move forward. So definitely welcome any candidates who might be interested in that position. We're right in the middle of interviews right now. And then we've also been working really hard to get the word out about our regenerative plan, because when we think about it, and as our CEO Bob Davidson has said, we have no interest in being just the first. It's being the first of many, and that's how we can really push forward on the systemic change and really helping other organizations, businesses, other aquariums really think about and join us in a commitment to going beyond sustainability. So beyond doing no harm to being regenerative, so giving back more than they can take. So we've been on the presentation circuit this year, presenting at various conferences and podcasts and webinars and things to try and get the word out about our commitment.
Cool. And so as part of the commitment, then have you faced any obstacles on part of that, or has it so far been just more laying the roadmap out, but the aquarium has yet to face the obstacles because you're kind of still setting up the blueprint, so to speak?
I would say the biggest obstacle for us so far is just capacity. And that was one of the reasons why we created this new program manager position, to make sure that there was somebody, now that we have the work plan, there's somebody who's paying attention to that work plan, making sure all the subcommittees that are necessary to execute it are moving forward on their day-to-day work. Because like with anything, when you launch a big new strategic plan, it's a whole new body of work that we're laying out for ourselves. So we wanted to make sure that we're bringing the capacity necessary to move it forward. So I think that's been the main obstacle we've faced thus far. We have actually just was it March or April? In April, we presented the plan to our full board for their review and approval, and got their full commitment to the plan, which is really important for us as a nonprofit, and to have not only our internal executive team leadership behind it, but our full board behind it is incredibly meaningful for us. And that was a really important step that happened this year as well. So we're not seeing any challenges from leadership or the board, which is great.
Yeah, that's great. And it also seems like, to the extent that you have had an obstacle, it sounds like you guys are on track you're dealing with it right now, and it doesn't seem like it's insurmountable, which is great. So one thing I want to ask is, I understand that one of the primary foundational pillars for the Seattle Aquarium is that it stands for diversifying the conservation movement, honoring place, and its commitment to anti-racism through its diversity, equity, and inclusion strategic plan. Could you provide some examples of the aquarium's DEI strategic plan in practice, and talk a little bit about what this means within the context of the Seattle Aquarium's industry at large?
Thank you for this question. So like any current and historically dominantly white-led organization, we're on a journey, and one that can't be solved by a single action or even creating a strategic plan. We've made a public statement about anti-racism. We've completed our strategic plan actually just about a month ago, and we're continuing to learn how to improve, our all staff DEI trainings. And we actually just began doing offerings around continued learning opportunities for staff. But we also recognize that these are just incremental steps, important ones, yes, but we will be on this journey for as long as the organization exists. So just wanted to start by saying that. And since we just completed our DEI strategic plan, like with our regenerative plan, we're just in the phase now where we're bringing that plan to our board for their review and consideration to make sure we have buy-in at the highest level of leadership at our organization. But we have already started conversations around how to implement some aspects of that plan, particularly the internal pieces that are making us look across the organization, across our staff, and think about ways that we can build a culture of inclusion and make sure that we are treating our staff equitably across the organization, from the moment that we're recruiting for staff all the way through to maintaining staff at the organization. So there's a lot of work to be done, of course. When it comes to our conservation program, so thinking externally, we're committed to decolonizing marine conservation. So in practice, that means breaking the mold of how conservation projects are envisioned, planned, executed. It means that when we're starting to think about new projects, we are starting by having conversations with Indigenous peoples and First Peoples in that place. We're starting by having conversations with local communities and the local experts in the place where the work's going to be done. That often means that it takes more time. So co-creating projects in that way takes time, patience. It requires navigating often complex cross-cultural differences and communications challenges. And that can be really challenging for some partners and for some organizations. But, in the end, the resulting initiatives benefit really greatly because then you end up with a more inclusive, collaborative, and enduring project in the end that also addresses justice and equity concerns of the local people. So I think there are two recent examples around that that come to mind when I think about how we're implementing that. One is becoming even more and more visible every day down here on the waterfront. We brought on Indigenous consultants from the Coast Salish and urban Indian community here in Seattle to co-create and collaborate with us on the aquarium design, exhibit program, and public art for our new ocean pavilion. So they've been working with us and had a seat at the table with us. And as the updated designs start making their way out into the public, you'll see it in the designs. And it's been incredible what we have learned and how much we've grown through those collaborations over the last several years. The second example, and this one's more of a kind of external conservation program, and that is that in 2020, of all years, in February of 2020, we were one of several founders of what is now a global initiative called Reshark. It started with people from 4 countries coming together over Zoom, starting to talk about how we can bring sharks back from the brink of extinction and what unique experience and expertise each of those on the call could bring to the table. And over the last 2 years, it's now grown to over 65 partners in 12 countries. And it's been an incredible journey over 2 years. Our first project is focused on Indo-Pacific leopard sharks. And we're in the middle of finishing the build out of 2 nurseries in Indonesia right now. And if all goes well over the next few weeks, we'll be sending our first round of eggs to those nurseries later this summer. So incredibly exciting. The thing that's happening this week, which just blows my mind, is that there's a team of local women in Raja Ampat who are quite literally weaving the walls of one of the nurseries this week.
Wow, that is so cool. It's very that's exciting to hear such a global effort, because it really does take a climate village, if you will. So global village. One question I do have on the topic of, it takes a village. How does the Seattle Aquarium compare to other aquariums throughout the nation on sustainability? Are there measures that could be taken to help other aquariums that are lagging behind to come up to speed? And, are there other aquariums that the Seattle Aquarium could, frankly look to, mirroring?
Mm-hmm. So the Seattle Aquarium is a member of the Aquarium Conservation Partnership, which is a coalition of now 26 aquariums across 19 states. We work together mainly to advance policy work, so to ensure a climate resilient, biodiverse, and equitable future. But we also have worked together on some business commitments. So our first one we worked on was related to plastics. So we have reduced single-use plastics, both front of house and back of house. But about a year ago, we started talking about what our next business commitment would be and started talking about a climate commitment. And actually, just this past Earth Day in April, 24 members of the ACP announced their first step in achieving a long-term goal of climate neutrality. And while we at the Seattle Aquarium achieved carbon neutrality in 2012 for scopes 1 and 2 and have been net positive since 2020, we did join our 23 peers in that and kind of sit as a leader among leaders in that space. And it's been, inspiring conversations among the other members to think about, how they can go beyond carbon neutral. It's inspired us to think about different scopes 3 that we hadn't thought about yet, and some really unique scopes 3 to aquariums that are fascinating. And we're having some really fascinating conversations among aquariums.
I bet.
Right? Like we buy food for people, yes. We also buy food for animals, and it turns out marine mammals eat a lot of seafood. So we're talking a lot about that. It's one of the things that we offset is the carbon footprint for seafood, but it's really hard to calculate. And we're talking about animal movements too, because we, like our colleagues, if animals at our facilities, if we breed them, we send those babies to other aquariums. It helps reduce, wild collection. So that exchange is happening among aquariums all the time. So there's shipments of animals, for example, happening all the time. Well, that is a carbon footprint. So we're trying to figure out how to calculate that, which is a little different than, a person getting on a plane. These are specialized containers with water and animals in them that move they move through different ways than humans do when humans transfer. So we're trying to figure out how to calculate that.
Well, that's very interesting. I would love to, be a fly on the wall for those meetings.
It's fascinating.
Yeah, it sounds fascinating. And very, very complex and difficult from the calculation perspective. One thing you did mention earlier is, microplastics are a huge source of deteriorating ocean health. I am curious to know if you can, for starters, maybe paint a picture for our listeners of, how serious the microplastic problem has become, but also, what the Seattle Aquarium is doing to help the public understand this problem and combat the issue, at least within, Puget Sound.
Yeah. So I'm going to go back to a pretty old adage of how much plastic is getting into the ocean every day. It's literally the equivalent of a dump truck full every minute of every day is getting dumped into the ocean. Every single piece of plastic that finds its way into the ocean breaks down into smaller plastics. The rate at which it breaks down depends on the kind of plastic that it is, but over time, every piece of plastic breaks down into smaller and smaller and smaller pieces. Most plastics never fully disappear. They just get smaller and smaller and smaller. So they break down into microplastics or even nanoplastics. So there are tiny little plastic particles across all the ocean, at the shallowest places along our coastlines, and in the deepest trenches off of Japan and the Marianas Trench, up in the polar regions, far away from where people have been living, all the way down to, places where, of course, they're epicenters of people. So microplastics are everywhere. They're also in the air. Take a deep breath. You're breathing in microplastics, or, have a sip of water and have some microplastics with your water. So they're everywhere. And, we at the Seattle Aquarium, we've actually been monitoring microplastics in Elliott Bay, just off of one of our piers here on the waterfront since 2019. And trying to get an understanding of whether or not there's a seasonality to the amount of microplastics that we're seeing, trying to understand the source. So the type of microplastic can give us some insight around where it's coming from and how it's getting into the waterways. And we just recently, just last year, actually expanded our microplastics work to 10 additional sites around the Salish Sea. And we're starting to explore what it would look like to not only take water samples, but to start taking sediment samples because there are plastics that settle out because they're heavy. And then there's things like microfibers that are typically suspended or nanoplastics that are typically suspended. So we'd like to understand what's happening down in the sediment as well. There's a lot of information we don't have. And while we're doing that research, we also are involved in the Tom Ford Plastic Innovation Prize. So I serve on the Scientific and Technical Advisory Committee for that prize, and we are one of the testing sites for that prize as well for the finalists. And the purpose of that prize is to find an alternative. We're looking for the unicorn, an alternative thin film plastic that's actually biodegradable. And right now, none of the biodegradable plastics on the market biodegrade in cold water. So that's one of the reasons why we pushed hard to be a testing site so that we could actually test the finalists in cold water. We're also, this one's fun, we're also exposing the finalists to a simulated whale gut because it's all good if it dissolves in cold water after a few weeks or a few months, but a gray whale might scoop up that plastic bag the day it comes into the water. So we want to know what happens when that plastic gets inside of a mammal's stomach and how quickly it goes away or not. So we have those two tests running for the next 8 months too, to help ensure that the finalists that come out of that prize will be good for the ocean.
Wow, that's great. I mean, that sounds like, a brilliant kind of race or, tournament you've set up for people to try to win. And hopefully the winners find a solution that can then be shared with other parts of the country, other aquariums, because obviously this issue is not unique to the Pacific Northwest. It's everywhere. And, if it's actually if they come up with, a great invention, then, it could be a very big deal for unlocking the future.
Definitely. It's one of the reasons why I agreed to serve on the technical advisory committee is because it was a global search. It was a global call for submissions. We had over 65 submissions come in, and from all over the world. And so the 8 final products that we're testing come from multiple countries all around the world. And so that's awesome. And once they select the winners, one of the other things that the Tom Ford Prize is doing is actually supporting the finalists to get to market. So it's not just, yay, here's some money. It's, yay, here's some money. And here's how we can support you to taking this to market to actually make it real.
Wow, that's awesome. And that should be part of the, congratulations package. Because ultimately, then otherwise it's not, nothing will get done with it, with that great hard work. So that's awesome. So I guess my last question for you is, in addition to implementing the aquarium's regenerative plan that we talked about and the DEI strategic plan that we spoke about earlier, I understand that the Seattle Aquarium is expanding beyond Piers 59 and 60 in downtown Seattle along the waterfront for those, listeners who don't live in Seattle. Is any component of this expansion engaging in an especially unique sustainability objective?
A resounding yes to that. So while we were already under construction for the aquarium's new ocean pavilion when we finalized the regenerative plan this past fall, we are now working with the International Living Futures Institute, or ILFI, to pursue a Living Building Challenge PETAL certification for our new building. So pushing beyond LEED, we were already committed to being LEED Gold, and now we're taking that a step further to pursue a Living Building PETAL certification. And the plan that when we finalized that in the fall, or even over the process of creating the plan, it catalyzed changes to the life support systems in the ocean pavilion, reducing energy and water use through recirculating systems. There's a really innovative system in there to recapture heat from the systems that are now, and then that's actually going to heat and cool the building. So for the humans that are moving through, the building is 100% electric and so much more. So there are a lot of things that also the ILFI certification is pushing us to think about. And we're the first aquarium to go through an ILFI certification. So we're also having some really interesting conversations with them about, well, here's your materials list of things that are on your red list. And here's some additional ones that we like to think about because we're an aquarium and we're thinking about impacts of chemicals on the marine environment. So we've had some really exciting conversations with them and kind of helping them to think differently too about their certification and what it could look like to certify an aquarium or other other buildings and businesses that literally, as a part of being, create conditions conducive to life and what that means for their certification. So it's a really incredibly exciting time to be on the Seattle's waterfront.
Yeah, that sounds so exciting, especially getting to kind of be, trailblazing in that, this effort to hopefully create a template for other aquariums to get certified, right behind you down the road. Absolutely. So that's really exciting.
Yeah, pretty awesome. And for those of you who are not in Seattle, I highly encourage you to come down and take a look at what it's starting to look like. The viaduct's coming down and the new road is starting to come into place, and you can see the places where the plantings are coming. And, by 2024, 2025, there'll be 25 blocks of stormwater filtration along our waterfront, which can only do good things for water quality. And, the aquarium is at the epicenter. So that's exciting.
Totally. Yeah, no, that's great. I definitely encourage all listeners who are not in Seattle to come to Seattle and check out all of the change that is happening at the waterfront, because it is quite huge from a historical standpoint. So thank you, Erin. And thank you to those of you who are listening to this episode of Sustainable Outlook. We hope you will join us again soon as we continue to explore the intersection of environmental, social, and economic sustainability. Until next time.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Sustainable Outlook. To listen to past episodes and receive notices for new episodes, subscribe by searching Hub Talks, that's HUB Talks, in your favorite podcast app. We hope you will tune in next time to learn more about the outlook of the burgeoning sustainable economy.